David, welcome to Growing Joy.
Hi there.
I'm so excited to chat with you today about something that, I'm a millennial. I was raised in the pumpkin bag, pumpkin leaf bags that you get and you fill up and they look like pumpkins and you leave them on your front lawn. And that is so not the trend anymore. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, there's definitely nostalgia around this whole subject
Yeah.
of fall and leaves and raking and jumping in the leaf pile. And that's okay. Hopefully, though, today I will convince everybody out there listening that maybe there's some better traditions to start that will not only, kind of have that fall flavor and, sort of set traditions for the kids of today, but also be a little bit more sustainable and
Mhm.
helpful to our local ecosystem.
And it can be really simple. And I was talking with my mom about this the other day. We used to take family photos in those huge leaf piles that would get blown, all over the place. And I was like, "Mom, you let us jump around in those leaf piles that were like full of dog pee. Who knows what was going in and out of those leaf piles that you just had your kids like frolicking in? I mean, I guess it's good for our gut microbiomes.
Sure, yeah. So sometimes it's best not to ask questions.
Yeah, it's best not to ask questions and just know it's time to make a change. So, before we dive into that, I'm curious, how did you become the advocate for Leave the Leaves?
Well, so I mean, I basically am a lifelong nature geek. I have been working at the National Wildlife Federation for 25 years.
Coolest job ever.
Coolest job ever. My title is naturalist, and so a naturalist is just somebody that studies the natural world and has a deep curiosity about it, and then helps other people to understand it by interpreting nature and the science. And so I do that at the National Wildlife Federation in all sorts of different ways. I do lots of media appearances, lots of podcasts. I've written books. I've hosted TV series on Animal Planet and Nat Geo Wild. Any opportunity to get out there and reach people and just be a nature geek and share my enthusiasm about all this stuff is what my job is. And so you're absolutely right. It is a very cool job. And I have actually been talking about this whole idea of why it's important to leave our fall leaves on our property as much as we can for actually a couple decades. In fact,
Mm.
recently I was going through like old papers and old files, and I found a media clipping from 2002 where I was being interviewed by a newspaper about this exact topic. So I've been talking about this for a long time, and I'm happy to say in those ensuing couple decades, I have seen the needle move. I've seen a lot more interest in this idea of like being a little bit more sustainable and saving some of these fallen leaves to provide wildlife habitat. There's even a climate change implication, which we'll get into. But I have seen a lot more interest in it. And that's why a couple of years ago, the National Wildlife Federation, we finally decided, you know what, let's just like declare the month of October as officially Leave the Leaves Month and really lean into it and really try to leverage that and get the word out about this very simple thing that we can all do to be a little bit more
So
sustainable.
simple. So simple. It's
It
like
really
the
is.
simplest thing. Okay, because I know everyone listening to this is going to want to ask you this question before we dive into this. How did you get this job? Like, what a dream job. I'm like, I'm living my dream job, getting to be a full-time plant lady. I'm like, how do I do what you're doing? Did you get a degree? How did you work your way up into this job that you have?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is privilege, being in the right place at the right
Yeah.
time and being able to jump on those opportunities. But yeah, like I said, I'm a lifelong nature geek. I grew up running around in the woods and catching frogs back in the 80s when it was still like kids still did that, which
Yeah.
sadly
I
they're not
know.
allowed to
I
anymore,
know.
which is a whole other topic that I would love to come back and talk about. The whole kids and nature thing, because that's something really core to the work of the National Wildlife Federation. But yeah, I mean, I have a degree in human and natural ecology and
Got
political
it.
science,
Cool.
thinking I would get involved in conservation through the advocacy route,
Mm.
fighting for, good policy and legislation. And that's critically important for conservation. It's how we get a lot of our work done. But I realized that I wasn't really good at that because you have to be kind of adversarial and you have to be, sort of tough and fighting because it's a real uphill battle. And it wasn't what I was actually good at. And so after I graduated, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And so I got a seasonal position at a nature center in Georgia as a summer camp naturalist. And what I learned by doing that job, which was to basically take packs of 7 and 8 year old kids in 2 week, sessions and teach them about nature and wildlife and all of that kind of stuff. What I was good at was being a nature geek and getting excited and breaking down the science in an easy to understand way, even for kids, so that we can kind of have a little bit more of an insight on what's going on around us. And around the same time, I had really gotten into the idea of native plants. And this was back in the 90s and really wasn't a hot topic, but that it is today. But this idea that wildlife can survive, or what they need to survive, is a habitat, is an ecosystem, and that doesn't just exist in faraway wilderness places. It can literally exist right outside our
Mhm.
door for so many species if we just rethink how we garden and landscape our own piece of the earth, right? And it really starts with planting those native indigenous plants that co-evolved with our wildlife over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and whose life cycles are in sync. They support each other, right? It's like two pieces of a puzzle. And when you think about, the what the typical conventional neighborhood is, and even in a city, a suburban or even rural area, it's mostly lawn, non-native plants. And so it's no wonder that we've lost 3 billion birds out of the North American bird population since 1970. It's no wonder the monarch butterfly is plummeting in numbers and is being considered for listing for protection under the Endangered Species Act right now. It's no wonder that a bunch of our native bees are disappearing, and some of them have actually been listed as endangered, right? When we wipe out the habitat and then we replace it with something they can't live with, non-native plants and lawn, and then spray pesticides everywhere, and rake away and throw away all of the leaves, which
Their
are important
house.
habitat, it's no wonder, right? And so the National
So
Wildlife
rude.
Federation, yeah, has this program that we call Garden for Wildlife that we've been doing since the 70s, since before even I was born. And so I was really into this, and I got lucky, and I landed the job as to run that program back in the year 2000. And that's when I wrote my how-to book, which is called Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife. That got turned into a garden makeover series on Animal Planet. And then the next thing I knew, I was hosting TV shows, and that was 20 years ago. And so fast forward to today, I still hardcore into this whole idea of natural gardening and native plants and sustainable recycling of these natural materials like leaves. And I get to do it for my job. So yes, I am very, very lucky.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this study, but this shift in interest, I'm so excited about it. Like, it's so nice that I think 10 years ago, the word sustainability, the word eco-friendly, the word rewilding or native plants was like only for hippies. Like,
Yeah.
only if you were in an off-grid 5-acre compound, and then you could do all of these things. But for me, one of my best friends who's not a plant person, like she's a strong plant killer, called me the other day being like, yeah, we hired this landscaper to do our backyard and they're rewilding it. And I was like, Jackie, what does that mean? And she was like, yeah, it's going to be a native pollinator paradise. And I was like, wait, if you know about this, if this is something that you are interested in, that is significant because it's cool now.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's got cool
Yes.
words. There's cool marketing around it, rewilding, all of this stuff. People can put a little sign in their front yard and feel cool and feel good. So it
Absolutely.
is such an exciting time, I think, for people like you who have been shouting about this for 20 years, and it's like we're finally listening.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I have seen that myself. When I do speaking tours each year and talk about this idea of native plants and gardening for wildlife. And I have been, again, for decades. And I always ask the question at the beginning, how many folks in the audience are familiar with native plants? And back in the day, no one would really raise their hand. I'd have to really explain what that was. Today, everybody raises their hand. Every major, garden magazine and website all have information on native plants. So you're absolutely right. And I love it because really there weren't many people when I was starting out in my career talking about this. And now I go on Instagram and I follow like 20 or 30 incredible content creators who focus on this subject. And I just feel like I feel proud in a way, right? Because it's sort of, help pave the way a little bit, I think, for some of that. But it's also like I don't have to do it all by myself anymore.
Yeah. Now the question isn't, is there resource? Are there resources? It's which resource do you want to pick? So
Right.
let's talk about the Leave the Leaves campaign. So we're closing out October. It's time. It's raking time, baby. So let's zoom out. What are leaves to the biodiversity of our front lawns? Because we're talking about our lawns, right? So why are leaves important?
Okay, so before I answer that, you just surfaced one of my biggest points that I want to make, and it's a little bit
Please
of a pet peeve too.
go for it.
So, again, we've been talking about this Leave the Leaves for years, and our message is leave your leaves in your yard on your property. And what I've learned over the years is that for so many people, yard is synonymous with lawn.
Yeah.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
that's important because what we're really not saying for Leave the Leaves Month is just leave the leaves on your lawn. Because if you do that, the leaves will smother your lawn if there's a thick enough layer, right?
And you're going to
Now,
get in trouble with your HOA.
correct. And so for when I'm using that language, like, oh, leave your leaves in your yard, and then I oftentimes get sort of, media quotes saying National Wildlife Federation experts say leave your leaves on your lawn. I was like, that's not what I said. I said leave them in your yard. And so it's kind of enlightening because it just shows you how ubiquitous lawns are and how people just think my yard is my lawn, but your yard does not have to be just lawn. And that's an important message here, right? In the big picture for gardening for wildlife and native plants, like the less lawn you have, the better. The more native plants you have, the better. And that's because lawns are not habitat. Nothing can live on a lawn, really. They are resource intensive. They suck up tons of water and pesticides and fertilizers, and they run off and pollute our waterways and our soils. And they're not really great for carbon retention and climate change. So, like, lawns are really they're kind of bad, right? And so,
Oh, they're trash. And for those listening, we just did an amazing interview on ground cover and this whole conversation of swapping your lawn out. So if you want to dive deep on that, go
yeah.
listen to that episode because you can have a lawn of flowering ground cover, native flowers. Like, why don't you want flowers on your lawn?
Absolutely. That you don't have to mow, right?
That you don't have to mow. Exactly.
It's amazing. So the whole idea with Leave the Leaves is we're trying to get folks to leave them on their property. And yes, they will smother your lawn if you have a thick enough layer. Like a light scattering of leaves is not going to kill your lawn, but if you got 3 or 4 inches, it will. And that's a good thing. So yes, if you want to do that, let some of your lawn die and turn it into sort of a natural bed. But the big message is, if you have to have your lawn because you have an HOA or, maybe it's just your aesthetic. And full disclosure, I have lawn. Right? Lawn is where I play with my dogs. And when my niece and nephew come over, we kick the ball around. And when we have parties, it's the people habitat, right? We play cornhole and all of that fun stuff. But I've reduced the size of the lawn on my property. I've lived in my house for 5 years by probably about 50%. And I've replaced it with sort of garden beds with native plants and trees and shrubs and all that good stuff. So what we're hoping people will do with Leave the Leaves is if you have to move them off your lawn, use them in your garden beds as natural mulch. And so now I'll answer your question. Like what are leaves? Like what role do they play? So think about this. At this time of year in, Northern Hemisphere temperate zone, so, we're most of America, right? Deciduous trees are getting ready to go dormant for the winter. And evergreens too, to a degree, and they're going to lose their leaves, right? So the trees and the shrubs, they'll drop their leaves. Evergreens, will drop some of their needles, not all of them, right? At this time of year. They fall down and they cover the root zones of the plants that they just fell off of, where they retain soil moisture, where they suppress weeds, and where they naturally compost and return nutrients right to the root zones of those plants. What does that sound like? Mulch and fertilizer, right? Mother Nature is giving us this stuff, right? Yet, over the course of the last, 50, 80 years, we have been essentially marketed to and trained, and some might even say brainwashed by, sort of the big garden industry, chemical industry, lawn care industry that, oh, you're a bad person if you have one leaf sitting on your, on your lawn. And you have to get out there and get rid of all of that, bag it up, throw it away, and then buy mulch and fertilizer from us, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of
funny.
insane when you really think about it. And that's,
And
in
buy
nature.
colored mulch too. Like, don't
My
just
gosh.
buy normal mulch, buy purple mulch.
Oh my God, yes. And you know what? If that's your bag and it's
Right.
non-toxic, go for it aesthetically. I'm not here to tell people how they should live their life. But if you do want to be natural and sustainable, stick with what Mother Nature provides for free, right?
For free.
So if you do this, if you adopt this sort of practice and this mentality, rather than getting rid of all those leaves, you're going to keep them, you're going to use them as natural mulch and ultimately fertilizer as Mother Nature intended. And so that in and of itself is just a hugely sustainable thing to do. And before I get to the wildlife, which of course is our ultimate goal here at National Wildlife Federation for why we're doing this, there's another really critically important reason not to throw those leaves away. And it actually has to do with climate change. Believe it or not, there is a connection. So, what happens when we bag up all of our leaves and they get sent to the landfill is that they get buried underground. That's what happens to trash that goes to the landfill. And for organic material like the fallen leaves and other yard debris, it breaks down in anaerobic conditions, meaning there's no oxygen because underground there isn't air, right? The way that there is. And when organic material breaks down in anaerobic conditions, it produces methane. Now, methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases that is contributing to climate change. It's way more effective even than carbon dioxide, which is the main one, at trapping heat in our environment. And our landfills, because of the volume of organic material, and there's something on the order of 10 million tons, 10 million tons of yard waste, which is largely fallen leaves and grass clippings, get buried in the landfill. And that makes landfills the third largest source of methane emissions, right? So, I mean, I remember learning about this and kind of having my mind blown. Like, who would have thought that like a simple thing that I'm doing in my yard could actually have potentially an impact on something as huge as the issue of global climate change, right? And
Right, like
certainly,
that's way worse. I feel like we have so much pressure to be more eco-friendly and sustainable and reduce our plastics and reduce all the landfill. That's like way worse than most of the other things we're probably doing in our homes.
exactly, yeah. And so, but there's opportunity here, right? Because it is so simple to not throw those leaves away, right? If you just adopt some of the practices that I'm going to tell everybody about, you can really keep the majority or even all of them. I've lived in my house for 5 years. I have not thrown a single leaf away, and so that is a really, I think, very important big picture reason why this is so important. It's again a great way to practice that idea that really runs through all of this stuff that the Garden for Wildlife, native plants, leave the leaf stuff that the National Wildlife Federation has been promoting for decades, right? It's really like the epitome of that old idea of thinking globally but acting locally. And me not throwing my leaves in the trash is not going to solve climate change. But if I do it and my neighbors do it and then our whole neighborhood does it and your neighborhood does it, right? It adds up and the
Huge.
benefit can really be, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to really create a movement here at the National Wildlife Federation to get people to just make some of these simple day-to-day life changes to be a little bit more kind of natural and sustainable. And it really does add up. So yeah, there's climate change implications for leaving your leaves, and if you keep them, you can really minimize your own particular carbon or greenhouse gas pollution contribution.
I just get more and more convinced the more technologically advanced, the more complicated and advanced our society gets, the more we are going to be pushed to return and reminded to return to how it worked before all this shit came into play. And like you said,
Exactly.
Mother Nature knew what she was doing with the leaf
Totally.
litter. So much of, I think, the next 10 years is us just going to be like undoing a lot of stuff. Anyway, not to say I don't love AI and technology. I love both of those things. More just like, I don't know, I'm just seeing so many people wanting to return. There's a craving to return to what's natural and what just makes common sense. So
Very much so.
tell me about the critters. Tell me
Yeah.
about the critters below ground, above ground that need the leaf litter.
Well, so just very simply put, the leaf layer is critically important habitat for a gajillion different kinds of wildlife.
Yeah.
And it's not something that gets talked about a lot.
Hmm.
Again, listeners are probably, again, familiar with native plants, and we know that, again, there's sort of a connection there with pollinators and with our birds and things like that, because, these animals, these kinds of wildlife are relying on them. And by the way, when we say garden for wildlife and native plants for wildlife and, wildlife habitat gardens, we're not talking about moose and bears and mountain lions, right? We're talking about birds and butterflies and bees and salamanders and toads and all sorts of other little critters, which are wildlife, right? We tend to think of wildlife as like the big furry,
Right.
charismatic, the bison and the wolves. And, those are not the wildlife that are going to coexist with us. But there are hundreds or thousands of species that can safely live right alongside us if we just give them a little bit of habitat. And so, the birds and the butterflies and those are animals and they are wildlife, even though we don't tend to think of them that way. So But yeah, I think a lot of people today, they understand that there's some connection with the plants and, caterpillar host plants, right? Like caterpillar butterflies and moths can only lay their eggs on certain plants because it's the only thing that their caterpillars can eat. And without those native plants in the landscape, those butterflies and moths can't complete their life cycle. Well, what people often don't realize is that the plants and the leaves in particular are also critically important for the overwintering cycle for those butterflies and largely moths.
Yeah,
So,
let's talk about that.
so the leaf layer supports a huge number of our moth species. In some places, as many as 94% of moths overwinter
Really?
as
I didn't know.
pupa in the fallen leaves. So what happens, in the warm months, the moth lays her eggs, the caterpillars come out, they on the host plant, they eat the leaves, and then for the last sort of generation coming into the fall, they will form their cocoon. And some species, crawl off the tree to do this. Other species will actually wrap themselves in a leaf and spin their cocoon inside of it. And then when that leaf basically drops off the tree, it falls in down with the rest of the leaves around the root zone of the plant. And that is where that moth in its cocoon will survive the winter in this layer of insulating fallen leaves. Think of the insulation in your house. It's all about trapping little air pockets that stay warmer than the ambient temperatures. And the fallen leaf layer does that, right? And so if you are throwing away all of your leaves, you are literally throwing away the entire next generation of pollinators.
Pupae.
Yeah.
Oh
And
no, they're getting
it
trapped in the underground.
exactly. Yes, they're getting squished and then they're going to die. I mean, I'll just put it bluntly,
Right,
right?
of course. Oh my God,
So
we can't do that.
totally. And so moths, again, they're important pollinators, but even more than that, and this is back to the whole idea of like an ecosystem, right? In the spring, those moths and their next batch of caterpillars that will be, laid in the spring become an essential food source for our songbirds. 96% of our backyard birds feed their babies a diet exclusively of insects and other invertebrates. And the number one group of invertebrates that are important for birds to feed their babies are caterpillars, specifically moth caterpillars. So not only are you trashing the entire generation of those pollinating moths, you are also robbing the baby birds of their only food source next spring if you throw away all of your leaves.
I'm a crazy bird lady. I did
Yeah.
a hummingbird garden a couple of years ago. I have two parakeets. I love birds more than I think. Have you seen this birding documentary on YouTube? These two, I don't remember the name of it, but they're two cinematographers that do what's the birding challenge? Like a big year when you do all the birds?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know the documentary I'm talking about?
I don't, but now I'm going to have to look it up.
It's fascinating. It's on YouTube, and I'm like getting ready to do big year. Birding is my retirement hobby, 100%.
Amazing.
Anyway, I digress. So
Yeah.
the songbirds, yeah. So, and once again, it's like they're a part of a larger ecosystem that we have to get tuned into.
Correct.
When we just remove the leaves, we don't understand the greater ripple effect that
That's
they're having.
That's exactly right. Everything is connected. That's the definition of an ecosystem, right? It's the interrelation of all of the living things with each other and sort of the environment that we live in. And there is no way to make a decision or a choice without having a ripple effect. And in fact, Jane Goodall, who recently passed away, that was one of her big messages, is that we have a choice on the impact that we have. And any choice we make will have an impact. It just does. And it's up to us to decide what that impact is going to be. And that is very much the spirit that this whole leave the leaves concept comes from, and what we're really trying to get people to adopt in their own hearts and minds. Like, this is simple. Like, I don't have to spend all weekend with a leaf blower. Like, I can actually do something that's a little bit better. And yes, you might, again, if you have to get them off your lawn, please use a rake, not a leaf blower if you can, because leaf blowers are horribly polluting, both of emissions and carbon dioxide and whatever, but also noise pollution. They're the absolute worst. And so just
There's
get your
one
rake
going
out.
outside right now. Yeah,
Me
they
too.
only
Exactly.
Start when I start recording a podcast.
Oh my gosh. I've been a remote worker since the beginning of the pandemic, and I never realized how ubiquitous lawn equipment was. Lawnmowers, weed whackers, but leaf blowers in particular are just pernicious. And as a content creator, when you have to be recording, I'm trying to record stuff for, TikTok and Instagram and for NWF's YouTube, and I can't, because there's nothing but the drone of leaf blowers, like year round. It's insane. I am sitting in my office right now with the windows shut, even
Hmm.
though it's still very warm, and I'm sweating because I can't have my windows open because it would bust this. All you'd hear is that in the background. So yeah, so use a rake. It's good exercise. It's old school, right? And just, you don't have to spend your entire weekend. Just move them into your garden beds and use them as the natural mulch that we already talked about that they actually are. But I want to get back to the wildlife because it's not just the moths.
Tell
There's
me
so
more.
many other creatures that
Tell me
live in.
more.
So, a majority of the creatures that live in that leaf layer are invertebrates. So, moths, they're invertebrates. Think of the earthworms and, all sorts of other, millipedes that are, detrivores that are actually eating the dead and
Hmm.
decaying leaves, right? It's a food source for them, as well as a space where they live, as a place where they have their babies, a place where they spend the winter safely. One of my favorites are isopods. So
Hmm.
isopods are, people call them different things. I grew up calling them roly-polies
Roly
or
polies. Yeah, me
potato
too.
bugs or pill bugs. And basically these are land crustaceans and they breathe through gills. Like they don't breathe through lungs, yet they live on the land. How do they do that? Well, again, it's because the leaf layer holds moisture. It's like a sponge. And so it stays moist enough for them to actually breathe through that moisture. And these are great little creatures. They, again, eat decaying material. They recycle it into fertilizer for your plant. They eat it. It goes through their digestive tract, comes out the other end, just like earthworm castings, right? They're very rich in concentrated nutrients that your plants need in order to be healthy, right? They can also detoxify heavy metals in the soil, which I just think is the coolest thing, isopods. So anyway, there's tons of all of those invertebrates. The moths, I think, surprise people. The
Hmm.
other one that is just one of the most beloved groups of insects that I can think of are fireflies, right?
Yeah.
So fireflies, they're not actually flies. The other name for them are lightning bugs. They're not bugs either, which is an actual specific kind of insect. Fireflies are actually beetles, and most beetles have a larval stage, sort of a beetle grub, if you will. Just like a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, these beetle larvae turn into the adult beetles. And so we're familiar with fireflies because they fly around and they flash and we see them. But again, I don't think a lot of folks know that they start out as these larvae that live in the leaf layer, right? And so without the leaf layer, you disrupt the life cycle of the fireflies. And again, it is no wonder that fireflies, many species, are rapidly disappearing in our lifetimes. And if we continue on the trajectory that we're going, we might not have fireflies, or at least not in local areas, right, where we've just wiped out all the habitat by getting rid of the fallen leaves and getting rid of all the native plants and then spraying insecticides, right? And so fireflies are totally dependent on that moist leaf layer and other sort of woodland. Yeah, they live under fallen logs and things like that. So try to save that in your yard and you'll help out the fireflies. But there's more.
But wait.
I mentioned salamanders, one of my favorite group of wildlife. These are amphibians, so salamanders, frogs, and toads. So these animals, one of the things that's notable about them is that they exchange gas and liquid right through their skin. And in fact, there's a whole group of salamanders called the lungless salamanders that
Hmm.
don't have lungs. They don't breathe through lungs. They absorb all the oxygen they need through their skin, but their skin has to stay moist in order for it to work. So again, that moist leaf layer is their habitat. They live under those leaves or they tunnel underneath. And many of our terrestrial frogs and toads do the same thing, in particular in winter. So again, they use it as an insulating blanket, just like those moth cocoons do. One of my favorites are gray tree frogs. They're a species that's found, across the eastern half of the U.S. They're so cool. They look like gray army camouflage to sort of hide themselves on the bark of trees. But in winter, they bury themselves under the leaves and under fallen woody debris. They actually have an antifreeze capability in their blood. So they can kind of freeze solid and not die because that keeps their cell walls from rupturing from the ice crystals in their blood. It's kind of amazing. And they need that fallen leaf layer. So there's insects and the birds that rely on them next spring,
Right.
that are utilizing that leaf layer. There are amphibians. There's also lizards and turtles, box turtles, same thing. They bury themselves under the leaf layer. Oh, I forgot one other really important group of insects, bumblebees. So most of our wild native bee species, there's like 4,000 of them here in North America, not the honeybee. Most of our native bees don't live in hives. They don't have queens. They don't make honey. Like everything you think you know about bees
Yeah.
is actually wrong because it only applies to like the honeybee, which is the exception to the rule. But
And aren't honeybees are European? They're not even native.
they're
Yeah.
not wildlife. They're like chickens or cows. They're
Right.
domesticated and they're important and they're great, but they're not wildlife. Meanwhile, we have all these incredible wild bee species, many of which are disappearing. I know I keep, Debbie Down or Womp Womp,
Mm.
but it's true, right? And it's all because of our actions. But bumblebees, they do form hives. They are a social bee. They do have a queen. Now, the hive itself dies out around this time of year when the weather gets cold, but the new queens emerge from that hive. And guess where they go? They go under the leaf layer, and that is where they overwinter. And so, without that leaf layer, again, you might actually be throwing away next year's bumblebee queens
Yeah.
if you throw them out. And so, really, really important. But there's one last one to talk about that is also one of my favorites. That again, I think kind of blows people's mind. There's a little bit of a wow factor here. There's a kind of bat, bats flying through the air, right, or hibernating in caves. Who would have thought that there was a kind of bat that actually buries itself under the fallen leaves? The eastern red bat, which is found again across most of the eastern half of the country, it's a very cold adapted bat. As its name suggests, it's got sort of a reddish color to its fur. It even has sort of the wing membrane that extends between its tail and its legs, which not all bats have, but this one does, is actually furry, and it can fold itself, that membrane, up over its belly area to serve as like a little warm blanket.
Portable blanket. I love
They're like
this.
so cool, right? So the eastern red bat, in the northern parts of the range, they go all the way up into Canada. They will migrate and then hibernate, right? And so, but even in places further south in their range where they're migrating to, it sometimes does get below freezing. And so typically they'll be like roosting in old dead trees or under pieces of bark in a dead tree, and that's where they'll spend the winter. But if it gets below freezing, they will drop down to the ground and bury themselves under the fallen leaves and woody debris and brush and whatever, again, for that added insulation. So, I mean, the leaves are so important for so many species of wildlife. Come spring, all sorts of birds are going to be foraging them in those leaves. Robins, you think of them, oh, the robin on the lawn, but that's their last, their last resort. Where they want to be is in a forested environment, picking through all of the leaves. But brown thrashers and towhees are another one that are a leaf layer forager. They're hunting in those leaves. So again, on and on and on and on. There's so many animals that rely on that leaf layer. And I go back to what I said before. These are all wildlife species that are disappearing unnecessarily. Like, we could just give them a little bit of habitat, make a few new garden beds, eat up some of your lawn, plant native plants that in the spring and the summer are going to provide nectar and pollen for the butterflies and the bees. There'll be host plants for the caterpillars, and actually many of our native bees are pollen specialists. They can only feed their babies the pollen of certain native plants. So they're going to flower, the nectar and the pollen are going to be a food source. Then once they're pollinated, those native plants will form seeds or berries or nuts that mammals and birds and people are going to eat, right? But it doesn't stop then, right? They're going to die back. The native bees are going to overwinter in those old perennial stems. The bumblebee queens are going to bury themselves underneath the fallen leaf layer, along with the moth pupa and the firefly larva and all sorts of other creatures, and the red bats and the gray tree frogs and the lungless salamanders, right there. In the fall and the winter, life is still going on, right? It's just dormant. And it's all dependent on the plants. And in this case, it's dead parts of the plants, the fallen leaves or the stems. But like the life cycle continues all year round, even in places where we have those 4 different seasons. So that's really what it's all about. There's so many reasons to keep those fallen leaves so that you can benefit these great wildlife neighbors that you can see and enjoy. If you're a birder, birders are the easiest to sell this to, right? Because you want to see more birds, right?
Yeah. So you've totally convinced me. It's time to put this practice to where it needs to be. Is it just garden beds? Like, what's the process? So I'm gonna take my rake, I'm gonna make a pile of all my leaves, and then am I literally just grabbing handfuls of the leaves and just putting them on top of my garden bed? Like, are there different methods? Should I be breaking the leaves up? Can I put them elsewhere? Like, what are my options?
All of the good questions. So here's how I like to think of it. Think of maybe a continuum, right? On the one end, you've got a conventional suburban yard that's pretty much just lawn, right? And you're maybe even required by your HOA or your municipality to get rid of the leaves from your lawn. On the other end is sort of the most natural, but also maybe wild aesthetic where you just sort of let the leaves fall where they lie. That's the
Hmm.
most natural thing
And
you
not
can do
rake them up.
and not rake
Yeah.
them or do anything. Both of those ends of that spectrum are not realistic, right?
Hmm.
On the lawn end, I mean, it is the reality, but I'm telling you, please don't do it because it's not realistic if you want to have life and celebrate life in your neighborhood, right? On the other end, the most natural, just letting the leaves fall, we recognize that most people are not going to do that. In fact, with Leave the Leaves Month, each year we've been doing a survey. And this year's survey showed that 40% of respondents were required to get rid of their leaves, at least
Mm.
from their lawn, because of HOAs, right? And so we recognize that not everybody's going to be able to just let the leaves fall. So the thing that I think is most universal that most of us can do is to utilize those leaves in the garden beds, around your foundation, any natural planting beds, and just use them like any other mulch. So you want a thick enough layer that, again, they'll keep the soil moist and suppress weeds and all of that, but not so thick that they smother, right? So generally, I recommend anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of fresh fallen leaves in a layer. You don't want to push them right up against the trunks of trees and shrubs, woody, because again, rot can happen just like with any other mulch. For perennials, your perennials are going to go dormant. So it's okay if you cover them, the top parts, because they're going to die off anyway for the winter, and the roots will survive and sprout again. But again, you don't want such a thick layer that it's going to smother them, right? And
Hmm.
so with the natural leaf layer, it's going to be pretty fluffy when you first rake it in there or
Right.
toss it in, right? So the thing to remember is that the first time it rains, it's going to sink down, right? And then slowly those are going to break down and decompose. They're going to get eaten by all of those great, isopods and earthworms and other critters, and they're going to turn them into rich fertilizer for your plants, right? And so my rule of thumb in my yard is that I try to put enough leaves in the fall that by April, there's still a little bit of them left and they've done their job as that natural mulch. And then, where I live in New Jersey. So by April, my plants are coming up. And by May, you can't even see the ground anymore because I've planted very densely. And so the plants themselves serve as their own mulch. And that's going to vary depending on where you live, what kind of trees you have. Oak leaves are very tough. They take a long time to break down. Maple or tulip poplar or something like that, they're kind of very soft. They break down very quickly. So, it depends on what kind of leaves. I encourage people to just sort of experiment, do it this year and see what works, right? And
Can I
maybe
water them if I don't want to wait for the rain and I'm worried they're going to blow away?
correct. That was my next tip is if you're worried about that. And it's certainly some leaves can blow out from your garden beds, but I will tell you this. This is again one of the number one reasons I hear from people saying, "Oh, I can't do it because they're going to blow back all over my lawn." Not true. I do this every year. And yes, maybe there's a couple leaves that blow onto the lawn, but you would be surprised, even without wetting them, how little that actually happens, even after windstorms. And I actually have taken pictures of my yard in October versus December versus February just to show, like, really that these leaves are not blowing out of my beds anywhere nearly as badly as you think they might. But yes, get the hose out, give them a water. That will immediately kind of get them kind of locked in place a little bit more and that'll get the decomposition process going. Again, it'll help, with that soil moisture or that moisture retention that is one of their key functions. So that is what I think most people can do.
Hmm.
Now, you might have too many leaves for your garden bed. So
Yes.
maybe make a couple more garden beds, right? Who doesn't want to do
Right.
that? But even if that's not an option, there's some other things you can do with those leaves to keep them out of the landfill, which is the most important thing. Okay. So you can add them to an existing compost pile. You can literally just make a leaf pile and it will naturally break down.
You can start your own
Exactly. Yeah.
compost pile.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like the best practice with compost, it's a variety of green and brown
Hmm.
materials and whatever. But, the leaf mold that forms from just a giant pile of leaves by next fall, that will be delicious, wonderful soil additive that you can spread around your garden beds too. Now, you could also shred them. A lot of people want to shred them because it reduces the volume. Or if you have a mulching mower and there's just a light covering, say on your lawn, you can just mulch mower them and it'll chop them up and return them to the soil of your lawn where
Hmm.
they will actually help feed your lawn. The only downside to the chopping and to a lesser degree the composting, right, is that you are going to chop up any insects or critters that are in that leaf layer. But that is, and again, I I hear from people on both sides of the spectrum, people resisting, but then there's also the people that care so much and they are like, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person because I can't keep every single leaf and I had to shred them, and I'm here to tell everybody who's worried about that is it's okay. You know,
Do
if
what you can.
do what you can.
Even if you can only do one bed and that's one less bag you're sending to the
Correct.
landfill, like even if you just reduce the bags you're sending to the landfill by 50%, obviously we want you to reduce them by 100%, but start
Right.
somewhere.
You got it. That's
Yeah,
exactly right. So, we as conservationists, as animal lovers, I think we're naturally prone to just hold a lot of guilt at the horrors of the world. And
totally.
so I just want everybody to know exactly what you just said. Like,
You're
do what you
doing great.
can. You're doing great. And yes, try to do better and try to do more. But like, please do not beat yourself up over something like that, right? Making the effort is what's important and you'll get better, It might take time. Maybe it will take a few years to reduce your lawn by 50% like I have. I'm
Hmm.
still working to reduce my lawn. And so, yeah, I mean, wherever you are on the journey is important and don't beat yourself up over it. So, yeah, so compost the leaves in a compost pile or just make a big leaf pile. Use them as natural mulch. You can chop them or mulch mower them, whatever you can do to keep them out of the landfill. If you have a municipal leaf collection program, so where I live, my town does collect leaves and does have a municipal composting program. So
Amazing.
yeah, that's a great option if you have more leaves than you can keep on your property. Again, it's
And I
not
bet
going
a lot of people have a town that has that and they don't even know that that's available to them.
exactly. And this is another thing that people can do is you can use your voice. You can be an advocate for these things. We were talking about leaf blowers. Again, my community, I live in Maplewood, New Jersey. And
Love
we're
Maplewood.
Yeah, we're a pretty rad community, if I do say so. We just passed a ban on leaf blowers for a
Cool.
big portion of the year, gasoline-powered leaf blowers,
Very
which
cool.
are the ones that are most egregious in terms of air and noise pollution. So like you can do this, right? You can get involved, get on your HOA board, right?
Hmm.
Get on your town beautification committee. There's things that you can do. You can be an active citizen, and especially with the sort of the state of the world and the big picture uh, destabilization we're seeing at the top levels and all sorts of horrible stuff. Like sometimes the best way to make the change for the future is to get involved locally. You
100%.
know,
It's the only way.
grassroots,
Yeah.
they grow up to grass tops and eventually that snowball. So yeah, like if you're distraught at what's happening in our country right now, go leave some leaves, right? It'll soothe your soul, it'll make a difference, and it will, when you see the wildlife show up in the spring, if you're lucky
Hmm.
enough and skilled enough to spot some of these moth pupa, which are so incredibly camouflaged, it's so hard, even me, a trained professional, to spot
Yeah.
them. Like if you see that, if you see the bird feeding the caterpillar in the spring and you're like, that caterpillar is there because I left my leaves, oh my
Hmm.
God, talk about lifting your spirits, talk about empowering you to do more. Like this stuff is heady and it's powerful when you do it. These simple acts,
And
these
it's
local
simple. Yeah.
local acts, right? And so yeah, and that's a great way to sum it all up. It's simple, it's free. You'll save
Hmm.
a buck. You'll, have your little piece of contribution to limiting the worst of climate change. You'll be saving all of these incredibly cool wildlife species that you're going to get to see and enjoy. Next summer when you see all the fireflies in your yard, right? Like again,
Yeah. You're going
I
to
did
feel a
that.
part of it. And we are a part of it. We are a part of the ecosystem. We feel so separate from it, but we are one species in this larger ecosystem of species. And that's how you start to feel connected.
That is 100% what it's all about. And yeah,
Yeah.
think globally, act locally, and start with your leaves.
Start with your leaves. You mentioned monarchs. I'm obsessed with monarchs. I grew milkweed for the first time this year. That's the other thing. It's like, this is so simple. I grabbed a milkweed at the garden center. I put it in my raised bed. I got to watch like 5 generations of monarchs hatch this year. It was
Amazing.
exquisite. I'm going to be a monarch for Halloween this year. I had to ask
Amazing.
you, what have you been for Halloween? I feel like you mentioned so many different things. Like, have you ever been
Oh,
a bat for Halloween?
I've never been a bat, but for many years, I don't know if you ever watched the Wendy Williams show, but I was a
Mhm.
regular guest and I would do the Halloween episode. So I have been a werewolf. I have been Batman.
Love it.
I've been Batman. I haven't, it wasn't an actual bat.
Okay,
I was a bison one year.
cool.
I'm a regular on the Today Show as well, and so I've done a lot of Halloween episodes with them. Robin Hood. I'm trying to remember some of my past costumes, but yeah,
You got to be a
those are.
moth.
I
You love
could.
the
Oh
moths.
my
You got
God,
to be a moth
yes,
for Halloween.
or maybe even a firefly, or maybe a red bat. I don't know. I haven't planned out my Halloween costume yet,
A
so
red bat would be cool because you could like put a blanket, like maybe you wear like a snoogle.
yes.
You could probably do something pretty cool. So anyway, also this can be fun. I'm inspired by I'm dressing up literally as a monarch for Halloween because I had such an enriching experience with monarchs this year. There's so many different places to start. Leave the Leaves. Let us know, you guys, you've mentioned so many resources beyond Leaves the Leaves. Where can everybody learn more about you and follow you and also the Wildlife Federation?
Yeah, so there's a few things. Number one, I want everybody to go to our Leave the Leaves website. It's NWF as in National Wildlife Federation, nwf.org/leave the leaves, or you can just Google Wildlife Federation Leave the Leaves. We've got tons more information, lots of, every year we produce a whole bunch of new content, really fun stuff. In fact, this year, a naturalist friend of mine has given us these incredible photos of some of our giant moths. So Luna moths, Io moths, Cecropia moths, and Polyphemus moths. These are the big honking moths, like as big as your head. And he had pictures of their cocoons wrapped in leaves. And so what he did was he took pictures of them in a landscape, and we made a fun quiz out of it of like, can you spot
Mm,
the moth cocoon in the leaf layer? And
I love.
nobody can. I got 3 or 4 of them wrong the first time that I did it. So,
Wow.
so anyway,
Okay.
there's tons of content, nwf.org/leave the leaves. We also have a pledge there. And I really hope everybody will take the pledge. It's literally just saying, like, I'm going to make an effort to leave my leaves. And we're hoping to get 10,000 people to do that. And, pledges are fun. Like, they're low hanging fruit, low bar, right?
Yeah,
But
plant friends, let's take the pledge. This
yeah,
feels extremely simple. This is such a
totally.
such an easy step towards mankind, you know?
That's right. And when,
Yeah.
when you take the pledge, like, it does help you to actually follow through and do the thing. And of course, like, when you take the pledge, you sign up for our newsletter, and you'll start getting communications from NWF on how to do all of this, Leave the Leaves, but just sort of all the garden for wildlife, natural habitat, native plant stuff as well, which you can opt out of if you don't want to get those emails. But anyway, that's a resource. And as far as social media goes, both the National Wildlife Federation, and our Garden for Wildlife initiatives are all on all of the social medias. So I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky to a degree, but I'm also on TikTok and all of the others. So is National Wildlife Federation, and so is Garden for Wildlife. So those are great ways to keep in touch, get some really great content, ask questions. I love interacting with people and answering questions on my socials. So yeah, follow us.
Yeah, we'll definitely put all the links. And I'm taking the pledge, plant friends, even though I don't have many leaves right now. But the leaves that we have, I will put in my garden beds. And I hope you all do too. This was such a fun chat. David, can you come back and talk to us about moths?
Anytime you want to geek out about anything to do with plants or animals, I am your guy. So yes, please call
Amazing.
me.
Absolutely.
Growing joy.